Hello folks, welcome to the episode 1 of Oz versus Serverless. This is the first episode of the serverless series, which is loosely based on my experience with a serverless computing model. Okay. Let's start with the basics. Serverless is a computing model which abstracts the platform and infrastructure and lets you focus on the functionality. Serverless can also be called function as a service or cloud functions. So AWS will be the focus of our discussion for the next few episodes. So in the context of AWS, AWS Lambda service is the centerpiece of the serverless model. But it's not just about AWS Lambda. There are other things that creates a really rich ecosystem. Some of them are cloud services, the other cloud services with which the AWS Lambda service will interact with, like S3, DynamoDB, etc. Then we have a serverless application model that will help you develop, deploy, monitor, test your code, and step functions to support advanced workflows. And then Lambda at edge, which will help you create serverless functions that can mainly sort of act as interceptors on CloudFront. Great. Now we have the basic idea of serverless. Let's try to create our first cloud function using AWS. For that, I will go to AWS console. Now we are at AWS main console dashboard. From there, let's click this link to go to Lambda Management Console and select this button, Create Function. For this episode, we will stick with the default option of Author from Scratch. Before we name our first function, it is important to understand the problem we are trying to solve. For this episode, we want to create a basic document approval process. The very basic, overly simplified solution is to trigger Lambda whenever a new document is added to S3 bucket. Then the function will create a new entry in the DynamoDB table. Sounds simple, right? Indeed it is. This will give us a good start. Now we know the problem we are trying to solve. Let's name the function accordingly. I'm not a big fan of generic names. I will name it something like document approval process, create approval entry function. That sounds just about right. AWS Lambda supports many runtimes. I choose Node.js, but there are other options as well. For role dropdown, choose the default option, which is choose an existing role, because I have already created a role that allows our function to talk to DynamoDB and CloudWatch. One important thing to note is that when you are creating role, try to create policies as specific as possible. All right, so let's click on create function. This will take us to the function detail view. Right now, our function is not doing anything. Let's add some code. This is how the default code looks like. A handler function, which is the main entry point whenever the Lambda function is invoked. And you can see these three parameters. Event, the first one, will contain the information of the event that triggered the invocation. The context, contain information about the context in which the function is running, and an optional third parameter called callback that you can use optionally to send information to the caller. So let's add some information related to the problem we are trying to solve. I have the code in with me, so I will just copy and paste for the sake of time. And the index.js is pretty straightforward for this Lambda. Couple of includes. I will talk about review manager in a moment. And then the main handler function is creating an instance of review manager and calling a function called add document and passing the information coming from the event regarding S3, and then based on the result calling the callback. So let's extend this lambda by creating another file called reviewmanager.js, and let me open this one. Copy, code, and paste here. So where is it now? All right, so this is the main class which is responsible for the business logic of the Lambda function. And if you look at this code, there is one function called add document, which is taking the reference of the file which we add in S3 and the bucket information, and based on that create an entry in DynamoDB. There is one particularly interesting aspect of add document function. It is taking into account the environment variable called table name, and it is using a default name review list if the environment variable is not provided. This is a smart way of keeping the function open to point to different tables based on the need. And for example, if I don't want to point to review list table, I can add my own environment variable and I can name it like something else, like pending approval. And apart from that, you can also add tags to your Lambda function that will help in grouping and filtering of your function. For now, we can keep it as it is. We can also add the description, and we will. So these are the advanced functionality like VPC and debugging and error handling that we will touch upon later in later episodes. And one thing to notice about concurrency is that the concurrency level is set on account level per region. So if you have multiple Lambda functions, it's don't think that your each function can run concurrently up to 1,000 lambdas at the same time, because it's a shared unreserved pool that all the lambdas within the same region will use. So I will not touch it for now, and will save the function. Okay, there you go. Our first Lambda function is saved. Hooray! Now we have our function saved, so it's time to test our function. As you can see here from this diagram, you can see that this Lambda function is using CloudWatch and DynamoDB. So the reason you don't see any trigger points here is mainly because the And this Lambda function will be triggered by S3, and S3 events are push events. You need to add triggers here in the situation when your Lambda function is pulling the information, for example, from DynamoDB streams or from Kinesis. So I have created one test event. You can create one easily from here. There are, like, you can create it from here. There are templates available. And then I have also created a table in DynamoDB called pending approval. Notice the same thing that I added here, the table name pending approval. As of now, there is no item in this table. Let's run the test. Okay, great. The test execution is successful and I can see the detail here. But if I want to double check whether this Lambda function worked or not, I can go to the DynamoDB table and see whether I can see an item added to the table. Great, I can see that a new item added to the table. All right, so far so good. Okay, we have made a good progress. We have just verified that our Lambda function is working. So now it's time to link it together. To do that, I will go to S3 and I have this bucket. And there, if you click on the properties, you can see in the advanced settings a feature called events. Let's click on it and add a notification. Let's add some name. And I would like to notify when an object is created in this bucket. I'm keeping all rest of the options as it is, and when you click on send to, you have choice either to send it to SNS, SQS, or Lambda function. Let's click the Lambda function option, and in the Lambda select the one that we created recently and save. Okay, so now this S3 bucket will push the event to our Lambda whenever a new file is added to the bucket. Let's try to upload something really quick. Yep, this looks good. Next, just set the default option, next, and upload. Cool. And now, to verify whether our Lambda worked or not for real, let's refresh. Awesome. Now I can see that a new entry is added to our pending approval table. There you have it, folks. We have completed our first Lambda function. This is our first venture into the serverless world. This calls for celebration. All right. So before we end this episode, I would like to touch on one last thing. As you can see on the screen, you can see one option called qualifiers. If you open this drop down, you see versions and aliases. This can be pretty useful and handy thing when you are working on Lambda functions and you are continuously updating them. So you can have multiple versions, you can go into the action and create new versions, or you can create new aliases. For example, you have multiple environments like dev environment, staging environment, and production environment, and This way it will be easier to promote the changes that you are doing to your Lambda function. And the cool thing about this thing is that each version and alias have a different ARN. So you can create your solution in such a way that some of your services are using different versions or different alias. So friends, that's all for this episode. If you have any suggestions or questions, please add comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care.